All right, thank you for tuning in to this episode 4 Extra. I'm here with one of our panelists from our seminar discussion about technology in the classroom. I'm here with Santhosh Balasubramanian, and he is a self-described technologist. So we're going to start there because as a history teacher, I hadn't heard that term before. So Santhosh, thank you for joining us. And can you describe for us a little bit about what a technologist is or does?
Yeah, first, thank you for having me. Basically just means that I work on designing and building tools to help people accomplish different tasks in their daily life. So that could mean that I focus on sort of designing how a tool should work. So I'm like literally drawing screens in an app or something like that. Or it could mean that I'm functioning as an engineer and I'm writing code. Or it could mean that I'm sort of coordinating a team of designers and engineers to accomplish some task. But at the end of the day, it's just like thinking about, what is the tool that people need, how should it work, and how do we get it in their hands. And so at Khan Academy, for example, I worked on designing and building the mobile apps and the website to help students find topics that they need to study or brush up on, and help teachers find materials for their classroom.
Oh wow, so have you always had an interest in technology as a learning tool or educational tool?
Yeah, I think I have, from a really young age, been interested in, just technology and its use in all sorts of different spheres, but in education in particular. I think part of what appeals to me about being able to work on technology is that you can sort of take a general set of tools and bring them to different areas, whether it's education or healthcare or other areas that could potentially benefit from technology.
Cool. So then you mentioned your work at Khan Academy. Can you tell us, so we heard a little bit during the seminar about the work that you do. Can you tell us just a little bit more for folks that might have missed out on the seminar about your work in education and the research that you're currently doing?
Yeah, so basically the general problem that I think I described earlier in the discussion was what Benjamin Bloom sort of called the 2 sigma problem, where if you have one-on-one tutorial instruction, you're able to get 2 sigma or 2 standard deviation points better results with students, but obviously one-on-one instruction isn't really pragmatic, and so the focus of my work at Khan Academy was providing a tool to students and teachers so that they could potentially reduce that gap, get maybe 10 or 15% closer to that. And so pragmatically what that means is that we designed and built improvements to the Android and iOS app so that students could go in the app and answer questions and practice skills related to counting if they're in kindergarten or calculus if they're in high school, and covering math, science, history, a variety of subjects. And so the core challenge was figuring out sort of what types of content students and teachers need, what sorts of questions they'd be interested in, and how to make it so that it's easy to do that sort of on a phone when a student is riding the bus, in the hallway between classes, or wherever else they might have just a few spare minutes to sort of practice their skills in whatever subject they're learning.
Cool. And is your current research related to that? Or I think you mentioned you were doing some research in the health field? Yeah.
So currently I'm working at Stanford School of Medicine on developing algorithms and technology to help physicians make decisions about how to treat a patient in the clinic. And at first glance, that sounds like a very different problem from education, but there are actually lots of parallels, because there's a similar discussion happening within healthcare about, what is the role of technology in the clinic. And so the simple thing is how do we use technology to facilitate, capturing data and sharing data between physicians so that they can collaborate when taking care of a patient? Or how do we make it such that, as a patient, you have more information about your care and can make more informed decisions? And so the research that I'm doing at Stanford in particular is on finding ways to give recommendations to physicians about, pursuing this diagnosis or pursuing this treatment option, those sorts of things.
Cool. So as an educator, as a classroom teacher, I know that there's really a spectrum of teacher beliefs relative to technology. There's those teachers who are very gung-ho and very much supporters of technology in the classroom and want that one-to-one teacher to, student to laptop or student to tablet ratio. There are teachers sort of in the middle that think technology could be useful, but it's not sort of the end-all be-all, and maybe districts shouldn't spend as much money as they're spending. And there are teachers who, you ask them to, all right, log into Google, go to, your Google Drive, and it's just like, what are you talking about? I don't remember my password. I hate this. We don't need none of this. I didn't grow up on, I needed to learn this way. So what would you say to teachers who are really skeptical of discussions around technology in the classroom, or skeptical of the general direction of classrooms utilizing technology more and more?
Well, so I think in general, not just in education, but in all of the other fields where you might think about using technology, it's important, sort of the number one principle is just meet people where they are. And so I think one of the challenges is that often education feels like a set of tools and practices being sort of imposed on someone, as opposed to just asking someone, like, what are you trying to do? What's hard about it? How could we make that a little bit easier? So for example, if I've recently been working with a high school, helping them with their one-to-one Chromebook rollout. And one of the things that I've been focusing on is just asking people, like, what are they teaching, and like what's hard or easy about that process, and what are some things that you're worried about that we could potentially make better. And in some cases, the solution might involve technology. In some cases, it won't involve technology. And so the focus that I have when I go to any of those conversations is just like, what's the actual thing you're trying to solve, and how can I help you solve that problem?
All right, great. And there are other teachers who it's not so much the use of technology that they have a problem with, but it's sort of the corporate influence. So, there's districts where every student might have an iPad, and there's districts like the one I work in that's, every student has a Chromebook and everything's Google driven. And there are educators who look at just the influence of Google or other tech companies and are worried that public schooling might be a little bit too much subject to corporate influence. So what do you say to teachers or educators who are skeptical of the role of these big tech companies getting so involved in classroom?
So I guess I'd want to separate two different things. One is, like, when you think about sort of corporate influence, there's a justified concern about just the cost of everything. And there I think educators, parents, and students can do a lot to push companies that are building these apps and these devices to provide those services for free, or to provide them subsidized to schools, because at the end of the day, what they should be caring about is student outcomes. So that's one point. I guess the other point is that I think it's important to recognize that in 99.9% of the cases where there's a new startup or a big multi-billion-dollar corporation that's working on education, most of them are in it because they genuinely care about students too. And so I think it's a matter of just like finding a way to have the right conversation where you recognize that everyone's interests are actually aligned to help the lives of students and teachers. And from there, figure out sort of like what are good solutions to these problems.
Okay, so in the one-to-one rollout that my school is currently undergoing, I did hear a comment from a student who didn't want to get a Chromebook, and his parents said they didn't want him on a Chromebook because they don't want him having information available to Google. And in this current political climate, there are serious concerns about immigration policy and a whole host of issues. So there are families that are really skeptical of their child's information being accessible through technology to whoever. Having worked in technology for a while, what's your, I guess, answer to parents who don't want their kids' data to be accessible to these companies in their schools? I
think parents and students have like justifiable concerns there, and I think it's up to parents, students, teachers, and school administrators to find out, what are the right solutions that work for that community. And in some cases, the community will be more okay with, having anonymized data sent off to some company. In some cases, they won't be. If you have a need, you can imagine there's basically a tool out there that will do what you're interested in. And lots of people in the technology industry have similar concerns about overreach in terms of collecting data or other things. And so I think it's important to just have, again, sort of a shared conversation. One concrete thing is that, lots of companies have signed on to the student privacy pledge, and that basically says like you're not going to sell student data to other companies and that sort of thing. So teachers, students, parents can be proactive about making sure that the technology they're using in their classroom abides by certain principles that they believe in.
I had never heard of that pledge. Actually, I didn't know that was a thing. So then, I guess follow-up question to that: would it be, reasonable for any parent watching this to contact their school and see if they're part of a pledge or have any knowledge about that?
Yeah, it's absolutely, it makes sense for parents to talk to teachers and administrators about that. Like in some ways, like I mentioned in the panel discussion, the technology conversation doesn't so much bring up new questions, it just resurfaces old questions in a new format. And so like taking this example there, like this conversation about like what apps should my student be allowed to use in the classroom is very similar in some ways to the conversation about like what books should my student be reading in a literature classroom. And that's like a genuinely difficult conversation that has to happen between students, parents, and administrators, right? And teachers. And similarly with technology, I think it's up to sort of the school community to figure out what makes sense for those students in that population.
Great. So then I guess my final question. So I'm a child of the Terminator generation, Terminator films, and Terminator 2 was one of my favorite films ever. I cried at the end, true story, when the Terminator had to die, if he was ever really alive. But this concern about the pending robot apocalypse, what is the future of technology in education, or your work with technology, look like? When you look down the line, what are we looking at?
So I think the bright future for technology and education is giving students and teachers just more agency to sort of and more flexibility to determine what's happening in the classroom. So that could mean just giving teachers more time to like work directly with individual students or small groups. It could mean giving students more time to sort of drive their own interests and their skills. And all of these, again, are focused on just increasing the amount of agency that any given person has to decide, what's important for them to learn and how do they learn it.
Great. Well, thank you very much for sticking around for this one-on-one, and thank you again for being part of our seminar discussion. And if you missed the seminar discussion, definitely head over to our website to see that. That's AOTAshow.com, and you could learn more from Santhosh about his work and about how technology is impacting learning in America's schools today. So thank you for joining us, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you.